I intend to cover in this video another salient feature of my childhood experience behind the Iron Curtain on an experiment that has not been attempted in North America recently. Perhaps the last strict application must have been during the war years with gasoline saving speeds limitations and certain rationings. Yet the term austerity made headlines all across Europe and was applied to some extent in countries like, say, Greece. I like best following definition of austerity: conditions characterized by severity, sternness, or asceticism. Of course, back in the day, we had no idea that we were living under austerity in one form or another. And now, from a distance of time, I believe the austerity was mostly expressed in the lack of imported consumer goods. It must be noted, however, that we are living in this affluent society of abundance only in the last few decades, when globalization and free trade made it possible for free flow of goods throughout the world. So it is my impression and belief that Westerners also did not enjoy the abundant import we can all witness today. We had sufficient local production and there was no visible poverty or hunger. Probably the most notable scarcity was the lack of fresh fruit and vegetables during the winter season. All families prepared for the winter by conserving agri-products in various ways. Fruits were dried or turned into jam. Vegetables were pickled and jarred. Various dips were cooked and so on. But by the spring, the lack of vitamins was expressing itself in what we used to call spring fatigue. As I have mentioned in my previous videos, we had almost religious belief in the higher quality of the Western goods, and they were considered prized possessions. Those who had access to imports were subject to envy. There was a whole psychological campaign against the adulation of the imported goods. They used to be called foreign worshippers, but in a sense we all were foreign worshippers. The real austerity came to be felt in the mid-80s. I'm not going to discuss in details the fundamental reasons for the bankruptcy of the Eastern Bloc, but surely a combination of factors have forced that. And this is besides the reasons that free market and competition are the best known natural driving forces behind human progress. Central planning cannot work efficiently as it lacks the price signals which drive the free market. With the lack of competition in a monopolized economy, there is no price discovery. And without price discovery, there is no efficiency. When efficiency is not required, waste and squandering of valuable resources become a norm. Development must be forced and does not naturally occur. Own interest as a driving force of progress is non-existent. In fact, I truly believe that the Cold War was won psychologically due to the main difference between the methods used by both sides in remunerating labor. If you allow me to go off on a tangent here, in the East, no matter what you graduated and what your line of work was, you were more or less condemned to a fixed $100 a month, plus minus 10%. And whatever you can steal from your factory, or whatever you could extort from the others by employing your skills or influence, you achieved by advancing in a career. As I've already discussed in my previous video, was your only source of enrichment. However, in the East, most services like public transport, healthcare, were free or at government subsidized depressed prices. So truly affordable, if not free. To the West, even the lowest paid jobs paid a wage of at least 10 times higher than that of the chairman of the Communist Party. Westerners, though, pay for services extremely high prices, both directly or indirectly in various forms of taxation. The illusion that you are receiving a bunch of money and have no ceiling to receive as much as you can imagine under the right circumstances is there, and also the illusion that you are more or less in control of these circumstances. Or so we are told as children, and I guess we pass on this fantasy to our children. You can become whatever you want to become. It is this illusion of riches that would have inevitably won Cold War sooner or later. Practically, the contributing factors back then were probably a combination of the coordinated efforts to depress oil prices in order to shrink Soviet dollar revenues, the acceleration of the arms race, the strain of the Afghanistan war, the Chernobyl fallout. All this also minimized Soviet aid to allies and to my country in particular. In addition, several years of bad crops due to droughts. Some fancier urban legends also say that Bulgaria was pushed out of the drug trade after being implicated in the attempt on the Pope John Paul II life. Because, as it has been whispered, the local KGB branch used to trade our cheap, low-quality amphetamines for heroin in the Middle East, then exchanged it with cocaine to the West, whatever. Our small version of Iran-Contras, maybe. Drugs seem to be a favorite trade for spooks around the world, as it seems. But to be clear, there were no homeless people, no visible prostitution, no opioid crisis of any kind. None of the traded drugs found their ways on the streets in the territory of the country. There was no organized crime as such, for the simple reason that any criminal activity was swiftly and brutally dealt with. But the real austerity was felt when the supply of electricity and water became irregular in the mid-80s. I don't recall the exact year. It all started sometime in the 80s, but it spilled over well into the early 90s. We started having regular, pre-scheduled and pre-announced interruptions of electricity and water supply. To make things worse, these almost never coincided, and for my American friends, where there is no central heating and central natural gas supply, we have really small electric water heaters in Europe. Nothing like your 60 or 80 gallon tanks. Ours are more like 10 to 15 gallons. And although in modern times they heat up instantly, and you could buy just a small box which warms the water flowing through it, you don't really need a hot water tank anymore. Back then in the 80s, even a small 10-gallon water heater would take a couple of hours to heat up the water and would cool down almost as fast. In a scheduled supply of 2 to 4 hours of electricity, followed by the same period of time without, you must get real lucky to take a hot water shower. As with almost everywhere else around the world, you have no choice of providers of basic utilities. You have no negotiating power, you have no say in pricing, and you have no recourse on the breaches of public agreements. These basic utility providers are normally government-controlled or regulated and protected, which makes one wonder whether at all they should be a for-profit organization, since they're using private and public areas for their infrastructure, can expropriate anybody that stands in their way. Anyhow, back when basic utilities became irregular and unreliable, very quickly even the city dwellers in the apartment buildings returned to the old-fashioned coal and firewood heating and cooking. Propane lamps and cookers became universal. Car and truck batteries powered some lighting and small portable TV sets. But it was common to do your homework under a candlelight. In cities, hot showers remained a luxury, as you couldn't simply convert your electric water heater to coal and wood. And to this day, electricity and water supply remain somewhat unreliable, and we hear about various public scandals when bigger cities remain without water or electricity. So firewood supply and distribution remain to this day a major business, and perhaps in many suburban areas the main source of heating, with luxurious suburban houses using to heat up large water tanks as local heating. Although in recent years, of course, eco briquettes made out of wood pellets become more and more common. I guess the trend to use renewable and sustainable sources of energy reaches all corners of the world, and I can't help but laugh when I hear renewable. Nothing in this world is fully and truly renewable because it's just a finite world with limited resources. But I'll have to dedicate a separate video on these buzzwords. Back to the 80s, behind the Iron Curtain, regarding the regular water supply, to this day the only explanation I have is that it was caused mostly by the droughts in the early 80s I mentioned earlier, because otherwise it was the communist regime that built all the major dams in the country, all the modern infrastructure. The dams were monitored and maintained as strategic to national security. National security is another modern euphemism, of course. It used to be called state security, which I find much more appropriate. In addition, suburban and village houses either had already some old wells that had to be cleaned up, or started frantically digging new ones. It was common to have storage tanks of at least 2 to 4 metric tons for fresh water, if you had the necessary backyard to store them. Drinking water was also not an issue of life and death, as there were many public faucets with natural spring water flowing just for free, built by some volunteers for free as a hobby. And there you could see long lines of city dwellers carrying empty bottles to fill. We as children used to walk a couple of kilometers carrying 5-10 liter tanks to fill for the night. But the electricity is a completely different matter. We had the biggest coal power plant. Though cheap coal was supplied by the Soviet Union, things may have changed under Gorbachev, as he had a fallout with our dictator. We had, and still have, a Soviet-built nuclear power plant capable of fully supplying the entire Balkan Peninsula. It is now, of course, reduced to minimum capacity, not to compete with our new allies. We had huge hydropower plants built around the dams, which, now that I think about it, might have contributed to water mismanagement to some extent. But on the electricity, as we found out later, the communist government, in a desperate attempt to earn